President Trump is a world leader and is a world power. I don't think Russia is a world power today.
Good evening, members. Today we are joined by Alexander De Croo. He's a Belgian politician and businessman. He served as the Prime Minister of Belgium from 2020 to 2025, leading one of the largest coalitions. Before becoming Prime Minister, he held roles as the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Development. He is a member of the Open Flemish Liberal and Democrats. Please join me in welcoming the former Prime Minister to the Oxford Union. Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us here at the Oxford Union. I want to kick off straight with, you were at the Munich Security Conference and you heard the speech from J.D. Vance. Quite an exciting speech, and since then there is a lot of reactions whether this is the breakup of the US and European relationship. I mean, just the new German Chancellor has commented, and I quote that, my absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the United States. Is Europe and the US at a breakup point?
I don't think so. I was at that speech. There were a few times where I was thinking about just walking outside because I was so angry by what was being said. But it was a speech that went straight to the heart. It was about free speech. It was about how to handle democracy. I think a big part of the arguments being used were blatant lies. But it was a powerful speech. It was lies, but a powerful speech. It's a lesson for us politicians, is that in the times of today, speeches are not always based on facts and on the truth. It's very often about emotions. And there's this saying that in the United States, the Democrats do policy and the Republicans do politics. I think this was an example of how to do politics. I loved at that speech to stand up and say, now I'm going to answer you, but I was not in that situation anymore to do it. Now, on your question, no. I don't think a breakup will happen, and I think it would be a terribly bad idea to break up the transatlantic relationship. But the transatlantic relationship will be more stable when both legs are solid. And on the security side, that wasn't the case today. I mean, a big part of the security in NATO was being supported by the United States, and we Europeans had grown dependent for our security on the United States, dependent to Russia on energy, dependent to China on certain technologies, and that's not a situation where you want to be in. So my reasoning, compared to what Mr. Merz said, is yes, we need to grow stronger. We need to be more independent as Europeans to be a better partner of the United States. I think that's the long-range goal. Will there be a lot of turbulence in the months to come and in the years to come? Yeah, probably. And I think the first lesson as Europeans is that we should stop being, I don't know if you say that in English, like rabbits looking into the headlights. You know, when you drive a car and there's a rabbit on the road, the rabbit is paralyzed and looks into the headlight. And then it gets smashed. That's how we react every day. I mean, every day there's a tweet, there's a speech, there's something, and then we scramble to react. I think a big part of how we need to behave is master our non-reactiveness and just ignore a lot of things. But on certain things, we need to be very strict. So, for example, I mean, we're all NATO allies. If one of our NATO allies says, I'm going to take away a big icy island of you, that's something where I think we should react in a very strict way. If you want to change the name of a big gulf close to the United States, which has the name of your neighbor, honestly, I don't care. So we need to be much, much more cool-headed and work on our own strengths.
So you said the breakup will not happen, but it has not been a good start for the Trump and European relationship. The first thing is disagreements with the allies, the biggest allies here in Europe. how can Europe navigate the next years with Donald Trump? Do you think the way that Macron has gone in to make a case for Europe, is that the way to try to concede on stuff while also trying to make your point? So how should Europe be navigating?
Look, many observers will say it has become more transactional. Yeah. Okay, if it is transactional, let's make it transactional. And let's, because transactional means that you have to find interests and you have to act on your own interests. We know that the United States has an issue with the trade deficit. President Trump has been saying it multiple times. We need to be precise. When he talks about the trade deficits, that's in goods, because in services, actually the United States has a surplus. But, you know, if the trade deficits in goods is a problem, all right, then let's act. And let's try to find interests which are important for us as well. For us, disconnecting from Russian gas is important. So we could buy more American LNG. That satisfies the demand of the United States, and that helps us on disconnecting from Russian gas. That's probably a very cheap way of avoiding a trade war. And we just need to be way more transactional in what we want as Europeans and where we benefit as well. The last element, the world is bigger than just the United States. And we Europeans are the #1 trading bloc with the rest of the world. We trade with everyone. We should continue trading with everyone. It would be huge. The United States is going into the direction of an isolationist track. It's their choice. We have to respect that. From an economic point of view, it does not make sense. But hey, that's the choice they make. We should definitely not go down that track. When Ursula von der Leyen made a move on Mercosur, and Mercosur is trade agreements with Latin American countries, I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea, and let's push that further. With African countries, we maybe need to be a bit clearer on what we want. Yes, they have natural resources in which we are interested. They are interested that we invest, for example, in renewable energy, that we invest in education systems and so on. Our agreements, let's reduce them to what it is really about. And there's nothing to be ashamed of to say, you know, natural resources is something that we want to work on. And so that's part of the answer as well, is that let's be transactional with the United States, but let's say, you know, we're willing to work with the rest of the world, and let's put that into practice, since the United States is not going to play that role.
But I think, yes, you can be transactional, but what we have seen, especially, I mean, in the recent elections, that the impact of the rise of the right-wing parties, especially with the impact of Trump, is beyond just at the government-to-government level. Now they have impacted populations and politics inside certain. I mean, we saw the AfD, one of the largest proportion of votes they've got. We have seen Elon Musk directly giving talks to parties in Germany. We have J.D. Vance meeting. So don't you think there's also homegrown opposition that they are creating for you, which is harder and harder to counter?
Well, you could question if J.D. Vance and Elon Musk have been successful. I mean, it's unseen what has happened. But I didn't see that AfD was the biggest one. And I saw an incredible high turnout of voters in Germany. It was more than 80%. Yes, AfD got approximately 20%, I think. Okay. I mean, you should
not... second in the elections. I mean,
they were the second. You should not ignore the outcome. But still, I mean, the whole idea of certain people was it's going to be impossible to form a government in Germany. Well, that didn't succeed. It's actually, on the content side, it might be complicated. But in political mathematics, it's perfectly possible to do a coalition of the socialists and the Christian Democrats. So one could question on all those things that we have seen, with an American vice president being extremely aggressive in Munich, with Elon Musk using all the clout that he has to push his ideas. If all of that leads to only 20% for AfD, I'm not impressed. I'm not that impressed. And we've seen throughout Europe that extreme right is climbing. That's the same with extreme left as well. That's a sign of the times. And there's many reasons that fuel that. But I have to say that the ones who thought that on the other side of the Atlantic they could decide what was going to happen with elections in Europe, I think they failed.
So, I mean, I want to further add to that is, in addition to transaction, yes, you can be transactional again, but one of the current issue for Europe is security issue. I mean, with Ukraine invasion, it's not just a matter of transactions, it's a matter of European larger security.
Yeah.
And we have seen that Europe is completely out of negotiations, and the security of Europe technically is negotiated by the United States and Russia, basically negotiating the entire world order rather than just one piece of country.
Yeah. Of course, the question is, I mean, you can hold those negotiations between Russia and the United States, but a negotiation or an agreement has only value if you can execute it. If Ukraine and Europe is not there and we're not part of the negotiations, you really think we're going to implement an agreement of which we were not part? Honestly, I don't see it happen. So the risk that you have is that what you see is that, I mean, the approach that has been taken by the United States has lifted President Putin to a level where honestly he's not. I mean, yes, President Trump is a world leader and is a world power. I don't think Russia is a world power today. It's a regional power that has quite some weaknesses. I mean, in Syria, they had to give it away. And in Ukraine, it's now 3 years in a row that they tried to conquer Ukraine. They didn't really succeed. So what President Trump did is he lifted Putin to a level where I think he does not belong. Okay, that's a tactic that has been used. I would have done it in a different way, but I'm not in that situation. Also, in the Ukraine war, there's this whole narrative that everything was being paid by the United States, which is not the case. I mean, the United States, of course, has been a major contributor to supporting Ukraine, but to date, 60% of the support came from European countries. We don't emphasize that often enough. And if you look at the commitments that are being made, I mean, the commitments on the European side are, I think today it's more than 100 billion. The American commitments are 5 billion for the moment. So who is going to be there to continue supporting the Ukrainians? It's obviously us who are going to be there. So I think that negotiation is all off to a bad start because it's a starting position that is being created by lifting Putin at a level where I think he doesn't belong. And then secondly, this is a negotiation which is a bit up in the air because, yeah, they can agree on certain things, but who's going to implement it? And if the Ukrainians don't agree, I mean, it's a virtual negotiation.
Let's say that they do succeed in negotiations, and would Europe impose those, or would they object to the implementations of a peace deal reached between the United States and Russia?
I have no idea what they would agree on. I
So
have no idea what they would.
I mean, there are already things put on
Let's make
place.
it concrete. One of the things that could happen is that the US lifts the sanctions on Russia. That's a concrete thing that could happen, and that will have an impact. But I think that for us Europeans, I mean, those sanctions are crucial because those sanctions are a reaction to many things that have happened in Ukraine, but also happen on a daily basis on the European continent. I mean, ships destroying our infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, hybrid warfare happening all the time, trying to influence our elections. I mean, all these things are happening. And actually, those sanctions, I mean, the problem with sanctions is that it takes time. But if you look at the state of the Russian economy today, it's not in good shape. I mean, a lot of basic functions of their economy are not happening because they just don't have the manpower, because a big part of their manpower is actually at the front line. Sanctions are more effective in the United States, are part of it, but if they do not want to be part of this, I mean, what's the trade between Russia and the United States? It's very, very, very limited. So if they lift the sanctions, that's on something which has almost no influence. The European side of it is a much more important one.
So I want to go even further concrete. Let's say the negotiation, the peace deal is that Russia is going to withdraw from some parts of Ukraine, the remaining part, the troops will stay there, and in addition to that, it will agree some kind of agreement that will not go any further in the next few years, and alongside the agreement is that the sanctions are lifted. Would Europe be happy with Russia keeping pieces of Ukraine in this negotiation?
The question
And
is,
would
the
you-
question
you-
is if the Ukrainians would be happy with it. I mean, it's up to the Ukrainians to
Of course they would
to
not be
decide
happy
that.
with it.
But let's say you have, first of all, what is a peace agreement? A peace agreement is something that can be maintained. So that means that Russia will refrain from being active in Ukraine. How do you secure that? Who's actually going to secure it on their side? I mean, their legitimacy is quite limited. On the other side, you will need to have security guarantees for Ukraine. Let's say that the United States says they cannot be part of NATO. I disagree with that, but let's say that that's the position they have. Then you will have to secure Ukraine another way, which you will do in a bilateral way, and probably it will be a coalition of European countries doing that. I think that it would be better off if the United States supported that, but if they don't want to support it, I think European countries are perfectly able to do that. And the big litmus
But do you
test...
think they will do it, especially, I mean, Putin has clearly said that Ukraine joining NATO is not an option on the table, and likely chances the Trump administration will not agree to Ukraine join NATO. But what security guarantees can Europe give outside the negotiations, and would they go against the United States?
Perfectly on a bilateral level. And on a bilateral level, you could say, okay, we're going to help you in securing your territory and so on. But the problem is that you will remain in a situation that the occupied territory will not be recognized. No European country will recognize that. And so you could call that a peace deal. It can never be a peace deal because there's a big part which is completely contentious and which actually only 2 countries in the world agree on and all the others will not agree on. So, as I said, it comes back to the idea that such a peace deal will actually be quite a virtual peace deal and will not survive. I think something like that will not survive 2 weeks. Not 2 weeks, because it will be violated on all sides. So, if you want to end the war, it can only work if you have the people at the table who it is about, that's the Ukrainians, and if us Europeans are at the table as well. We're a bigger partner of Ukraine than the United States is today. And in the future, we will be an even bigger partner.
And why do you think the United States has ignored both Ukraine and Europe in its negotiations?
You know, invite President Trump here next week and he'll explain you. I have no idea. I can't read his mind.
So I think going further on that point, President Macron was in the United States in DC, met Donald Trump. He also suggested that opening dialogues with Putin was important, but there's also Keir Starmer, whereas other European leaders have said that we should keep Russia in isolation. So what should be the position? Should there be some level of dialogues? And more importantly, I mean, the UK Prime Minister said that the UK will be ready to send troops to Ukraine. So should Europe, alongside the UK, be exploring the options of, if the negotiation doesn't work, if the United States does not back up Europe, should they prepare for a scenario where they have to be ready to send something to Ukraine on their own?
I think, first of all, we need to deliver on the promises that we have made on sending military equipment. There's a long way to go on that dimension, and you know, a war that takes so much time as this one, you win it with your industry, and you win it with your supply chain, and the European supply chain was not at the level of the United States. That is now coming up to speed. If your question was, should we build up a relationship with Russia? I don't see that. I mean, they on a daily basis are doing everything to destabilize us in all possible dimensions. So there's a long way to go before you can reestablish a relationship with Russia. But this is, I mean, at some point, if Europeans say we need to stand on our own legs for security, and I think we should, the litmus test will be a very easy one. At some point, are we able to send boots on the ground to secure Ukraine? And you could see that as a gigantic challenge. You could also see it as a way to prove to our population that we're able to do it. I'm not a gigantic fan of military spending, but this is the situation in which we are, so we should do it. And I think that you convince your population by showing what you're capable of. And so it might be something that actually reassures European population at a moment where there's a lot of anxiety.
So, but do you support Ukraine joining European Union?
There's a long way to go, and Ukraine has done tremendous efforts. But I am convinced that it's not going to happen overnight. But I'm convinced that, you know, if you look at the European project, it used to be a purely economic project, and it has been an incredibly successful economic project. I mean, the level of prosperity that has been created within those 27 countries is amazing. It's also a project of values, and values and economics go hand in hand. It is also a project of providing security to our population. If we want security to our population, we need to stabilize our backyard. Part of our backyard is Ukraine and Moldova. Part of our backyard is also the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans have not been stabilized, and they've been trying for a longer time to get to be part of the European Union. I think that 10 years down the road, we will not be 27. We will probably be around 35. Those countries need to do a lot of effort, do their homework to get in, but we also need to do our homework, because it will be a different animal with very different financial flows, with very different need for decision making. Decision making with 27 is complicated. Decision making with 35, especially with a gigantic country such as Ukraine, is a challenge, and we need to reorganize our functioning to do that. So they need to do an effort to get ready. We also need to do an effort to get ready. But as always, you know, the European Union started with 6 countries. Anytime someone was added, almost all the time, the debate was, we are here at the level of prosperity and they're there. And the fear was that this would happen. That's not what happened. What happened is that we stayed at our level of prosperity and all those countries were pulled up. And we all grew. This is what happened with Spain, what happened with Portugal, what happened with all the Eastern European countries. I mean, making Europe bigger has led to prosperity for all of us, because our trading area was bigger, our area for doing scientific research was bigger, and so on. Ukraine will be a huge one to swallow, but in the end, it's what is necessary to continue our growing prosperity, and it's also what is necessary to secure our backyard.
So talking about Europe, Belgium has been a key part of the very idea of European Union. You started as a common market, but there's also a lot of criticism. I mean, the idea of a common market, the economic prosperity has been achieved, but the criticism is the expansion of Europe into sovereign areas through whether regulations and directives, whether it's the European Commission and through the courts. And we saw in the case of this big thing within the UK through Brexit as well. Do you think that the European Union has expanded its reach in terms of the sovereign state that are part of it, or do you think that is necessary for the operation of such a supranational institution?
It's a very interesting political debate, but what you see with our population, even in countries which are supposed to be Eurosceptic, anytime there is a big crisis, what does population say? Please, Europe, take care of it. That was the case with COVID. I mean, COVID was about healthcare. Healthcare was one of those domains which were really national sovereignty. We tried to fight COVID on our own, and then until Angela Merkel said, let's do it together, and we were hugely successful because we did it together in a domain which was not harmonized at all. That's the same for energy. Energy is still very national, but our response to the Ukraine war was one where we did it as European countries together. So Europe used to be a project where it was visionary leaders, such as Jacques Delors and others, who would pull Europe in a direction, and people would say, whoa, this is going too far, I'm not sure we can do this. Where now we're in a situation where very often it's your population that is pushing Europe further and saying, please, can you take care of it? I mean, there's so many things where our population knows that the member state, the nation state, they cannot do it on their own, and that we're stronger when we do it as a team. So, no, I don't share that point that Europe has gone too far. have mistakes been made in being too directive and being too prescriptive? Yes. But, I mean, mistakes are being made in politics and mistakes are being made in many domains. I mean, only people who do nothing never make mistakes, of course. So the effort of harmonizing everything and also making the link to the rule of law and so on is what leads us to a common area where I'm happy to have friends. And in the world of today, if you don't have friends, it's not comfortable. And especially if you're a smaller country. And so Russia will always try to disunite us. The United States have been doing that all the time, even in democratic administrations. They've always tried to disunite us because it's much easier to intimidate a small country than a bloc of 450 million inhabitants. Even the United Kingdom did that. I mean, when Brexit was being negotiated, I was finance minister at that point. I had my colleague calling me one-on-one all the time saying, wow, can't we do bilaterally something? And I always said, no, you talk to Barnier. And all of us did that. So anyone who has European Union as an opponent is always trying to disunite it. When it is really about what matters, being the common market, the unity is actually quite big. I mean, when Brexit happened, people thought, oh, Netherlands is going to be the next one, and then after that you get someone else. None of these do that. Not even Hungary, who on the political side is sometimes complicated. I mean, when it is about the core, what we have, the common market, no one wants to step out of it because the cost would be gigantic. And you see it here. I mean, the cost of stepping out of the common market has been quite big for the United Kingdom.
So would you say that Brexit was a loss for the United Kingdom or Europe? And then on the top of that, I also want to follow up, especially with now Trump administration, the UK government's relationship also not the best. And do you think the UK is more isolated than it was when it was part of Europe?
Look, what is past is past. I think the impact for the United Kingdom was not a positive one up to now. I think a big part of prosperity was lost. And on the European side, a lot of our bandwidth was lost as well. I mean, for years in a row, we've spent time in deconstructing something which I think was quite useful. But all that is gone. What you see now is that there's a willingness to cooperate. I mean, the debate at least is open, is how does the United Kingdom and Europe cooperate? I'm not surprised by that. I mean, when Brexit happened, I always said, look, a lot of things might change, but geographically, the United Kingdom is going to stay where it is. And for us Belgians, I mean, you're a neighbor, and so will we have a tendency to trade with the United Kingdom? Yes, because the closeness, the proximity is there. It's interesting that today, the topic which is on the table where we want to work together is actually defense. Because in all the debates which we had when the United Kingdom was part of Europe, the United Kingdom was the one who always said on defense, never ever we want to do something in Europe. So it's interesting that today things have flipped around. But that's because we see that we have something to win, especially on the industrial side of defense. We have to win to work together in that domain. Will that grow to other types of cooperation? Maybe. No one knows. You know, sometimes when you eat the starter, you get hungry and then you want to have the main dish and then dessert and then coffee and so on. Maybe that happens. So I don't know.
I mean, talking further about Europe, you have highlighted that Europe must take decisive steps to remain economically competitive. However, the EU faces a lot of issues and hurdles with a lot of regulations in many sectors, and then there is these high energy prices, there is a sluggish innovation compared to the US and China. What concrete measures should Europe take to maintain its global relevance and to compete with superpowers at the moment?
So there's things which will take time, and there's things which we can do quite rapidly. Something that we can do quite rapidly is red tape. I mean, the European Union is a regulating machine, and not all the regulation we do is wrong, but we have a tendency to do way too much of our regulation. And so if you want to give a signal to your economic environment that actually things are going to happen, cutting on red tape is something which has a very direct impact. And this is not the Doge approach of the United States. I mean, this is a different world, but very often our industrials, they don't recruit a lot of people. The only department in which they recruit is in the reporting department for thousands of pages of reporting that no one is reading, and that is this type of policy by reporting that is actually leading to nothing. So that is a fast thing where you can give the signal that things are going to improve. And then there's a few things which take a bit more time. One is what we call the Capital Markets Union. Might sound a bit complicated, but the big difference in financing innovation that you see today between the United States and Europe is that in the United States, you come with a project which has a probability of 10% of succeeding, you will find financing for that. Because their capital market is so sophisticated that you will find someone who says, you know, it's very improbable that this succeed, but it makes part of a broader portfolio. That's not happening in Europe. You come with a project like that in Europe, private financing will not happen because it's still very national. Then governments will step in, and governments will say, well, I can only finance it if we de-risk it and the project fails afterwards. So that's a second big block. That's complicated, it takes time, but the payoff of that could be a huge one. And then our internal market is in many domains not a common market. I mean, biotech is something that Belgium is quite good at. A lot of Belgian biotech firms, when they innovate, their go-to-market is first United States, and then to Japan, and only then they come to Europe. Why is that? Because your market introduction is different in all 27 countries. That's a complicated thing to do, especially for smaller biotech firms. Harmonizing that would be a huge step forward. And it would also give our inhabitants access to innovation that is actually happening on their soil. I have not touched to energy yet, because energy is the more complicated one. We should stick to our goals of reducing emissions by 55% by 2030. Definitely not move on that objective. But achieving that means extending nuclear and extending renewables. And both will be part of the system, and we will continue to do some petrochemical, some gas and so on. But the nuclear revival, which to me really is most countries just extending the nuclear bases that they have for the moment. This is something that we have done in Belgium. It's not necessarily new nuclear, it's mostly just extending what exists for the moment. And investing massively in offshore wind and photovoltaics and so on, that's the way forward. That's not a solution in the next 2-3 years. So at some point, if we want to keep heavy industry here, which I think we should, from an economic perspective, but also from a climate perspective, because if heavy industry leaves Europe, it will produce somewhere, but where the rules are less strict, so in the end everyone in the world loses. It will demand an effort, and it will demand some type of subsidy to control energy prices to keep heavy industry here.
And coming back to regulations, what concrete steps can Europe take in cutting regulation? Because I'm a student of law, and one of the subjects we did is the European Union law, and there are a lot of regulations, a lot of directives, and they do to the level not at the larger level, but go so much to the minor level. Even if you're making a small restaurant, the European regulation will impact unless you have something, a toilet on the side, whether you can have a restaurant. Even small businesses to the level are affected. How this has been many, many years of regulations. Yeah. How do you cut those? What's concrete step? And is Europe thinking in that direction?
Yeah, there's a problem with philosophy in regulation, and that's because we have a tendency, what should the public authority do? Public authority should set the goals. This is what we want. How do you achieve that? That's up to you. That's not how Europe regulates today. What Europe regulates today, it's setting the goal, but it's also telling you how you should achieve that goal. That has a lot of impact. First of all, that leads to a lot of regulation. That also kills innovation. Because if you say, this is what I want, but how you achieve it, you can do it the way you want, and if you find a cheaper way of doing it, that's to your advantage. That's how you create an environment of innovation. And so that's where we need to cut. We should not cut on objectives, but we should say, how to achieve that, anything works. It's up to you to come up with something. That's not at all in our philosophy. And that actually is much more the case on the United States. I mean, the United States has a tendency to incentivize. We have a tendency to regulate. Incentivizing is the carrot, regulating is the stick. We need a bit less sticks in Europe, and we need a bit more carrots.
I want to move to the Belgian political landscape. It's a complex political system.
Not more than here.
There's no. I think
it's not more complicated than here.
It does not have some of the largest coalitions that often happens in Melbourne. It doesn't take too many days to form coalitions. Given that so many parties and such large coalitions, do you think that the Belgium's governance model is sustainable in the long term, or should Belgium look for alternative models for governance?
You know what? I've been Prime Minister 4.5 years. During that period, I've seen 4 British Prime Ministers. So who has the stable, sustainable system? We are a federal country, and a federal country has a level of complexity. But in the meantime, this has led to a country which is one of the wealthiest in Europe, with a wealthy population, with an income disparity which is one of the smallest ones in Europe. It's quite remarkable to have countries like the Netherlands and Belgium, which have small income gaps, but actually quite wealthy, who are multicultural countries with multiple languages. We manage. And we've never seen violence. We never, ever have we had violence. Yeah, we've had political deadlocks and political discussion and so on, but that always gets solved one way or another. So, yeah, we've had our periods where it was complicated to form a government, and that definitely is something that we need to solve. But that's a people's problem. That's not so much an institutions problem. We have a tendency, political scientists, however, it's a tendency to say the answer to a problem is changing institutions or having relations and so on. My experience the past 15 years is that politics is mostly done by people, and you can do all the institutional changes you want. If you have people who don't want to work together, nothing will happen. The opposite is also true. You can be a complicated country. If you have people who want to work together, things will happen. So to me, it's more on the personal level that there is an issue. I think as all European countries are in a situation where centrist politics is difficult, and the political landscape is moving to the sides. And that, I think, is a real question. To me, politics really is about the people doing it, and not so much about the institutions. Is how do you find politicians who serve the entirety of their population, and who can, in a world where people think that there are easy solutions for complicated problems, find ways of dealing with complicated problems in an efficient way, and in political communication, which today is 13 seconds. I mean, that's the average quote that you can give. And for someone with radical ideas, a 13-second quote is quite easy. Someone who's more in the center, more nuanced, it's quite complicated, actually, to do that. I have to be honest, I haven't figured out how to do that. But I'm open to learn.
But you just left office as a Prime Minister. How do you reflect your tenure as the Prime Minister of Belgium? But more importantly, are there any political regrets?
Regrets? This is not going to be tweeted, right? There's no answer to that. You can't guarantee that. So first of all, I have absolutely no regrets that I started that coalition. On other things I will talk. But you know, that was a coalition of 7 parties. That's a lot. But it was at a moment where it was necessary. I mean, we were in the middle of COVID, and COVID was really hurting us bad, and this is what needed to happen, and we did it. And many things that I started, political observers said, please don't even try this, it's not going to happen. And I did it, and many things that people told me it's not going to happen, it happened after all. So I'm someone on the can-do side, and if you tell me it can't happen, let me give it a try. On the regrets, I think it comes back to what I said about politics. Politics is about people, And so it really is about investing a lot of time in who's in your government, and in listening, and in convincing them, and in taking their feedback and so on. And I'm someone who, I love to talk to a crowd, I love to be outside, I love to bring politics into the streets. If I would do it again, I would probably do just a little less politics in the street and a little bit more investing in my government and in the personal relationships. Would it have made a difference? I'm not sure. But I think that on that dimension, I could have done it better.
So before I open the floor for audience questions, one last thing I wanted to ask. You have worked with many leaders across the world, many European leaders. Who has been the most pleasant to work with and the least pleasant?
That I'm not going to answer. Everyone has their own style. I had a great relationship with Mark Rutte, who, when I became prime minister, Mark Rutte said, well, he was prime minister at that point, and he said, well, Alexander could have been my brother. And that was a fun way of saying that, we agree on a lot of things, and I love to work with him. I had a great relationship with Kaja Kallas, who's now the High Rep on the European Commission. I think she's doing a great job. I think Emmanuel Macron brings something special to the table. And I really had the honor to work with Angela Merkel. And she was at the top of her game at that point. And yeah, she played a special role. At the council, she would listen to everyone. And then at some point, she would sit straight, and everyone knew that that was the moment she was going to talk. And what she was extremely good at was to say, okay, I've listened to all of you. This is what I think we should do. And she was extremely good at that. And you need people who, instead of making their own points, say, okay, this is what I've listened to, and this is the direction that we're going. And she's actually quite funny. When she had a few glasses of wine, she has a sense of humor which is very un-German, if I can say so. I don't know if I'm insulting anyone here, but in general, there's a reason at the council table why they are head of state or head of government. So everyone brings something special.
And the British prime ministers?
When I started as a prime minister, the Brexit already happened. Yeah. I've had interesting debates with Boris, with Liz, and with the others.
So Liz was there long enough for you guys to have a conversation?
Yeah, some of them was quite short, that's true. And if I say interesting, the question is it interesting in the American sense or the British sense? Both apply.
Okay, so if you have any questions from the audience, please raise your hands, and the member come there. Yes, we'll just take the member in the white top, yeah.
Well, thank you for your talk. I was wondering, given the Russian aggression and the American isolationism, do you think the EU should create an European army?
Okay. In an ideal world, yes. Should it be our priority right now? No. Because it will take a tremendous amount of effort to do it. And out of the 27, there will be a few countries who are not willing to do it. So on that domain, I would rather say, let's make coalitions of the willing. And there are countries who are doing that. Belgium is one of them. If you take everything which is naval and air force, Belgium and Netherlands do it together. We protect each other's airspace, for example. On everything which is land force, we work together with the French. And so rather build coalition of the willing and let them do it than trying to make this 27-country behemoth, which is going to take a lot of time. Will we do it at some point? I'm convinced we will, but this is not the right moment to do it. And then there's NATO in any case. And if we need to integrate something, it's not so much our armies that need to integrate. What needs to integrate is our industry. We need finally to make it possible to have M&A activity between our defense companies. That has been blocked over the last years because many countries were afraid because this is sensible things. So integrating our defense industry is a much higher priority than trying to create a European army.
Okay. Is the member in the last row?
Yes, from. You spoke very compellingly, I thought, about...
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
You have light on top of you.
Further European expansion, but to what extent do you think that's compatible with the preservation of a Europe that can actually act on the world stage? I think you made some really compelling points, but a lot of countries are unwilling or unable to accept, more sovereign control from European institutions. And as a market integrationist yourself, how do you balance the effectiveness of European institutions without the encroachment on, the sovereignty of countries that maybe don't share Belgium's flexibility when it comes to national sovereignty?
Yeah, I mean, national sovereignty is something you often use in political debates, and that sounds well. But if you look at the challenges in which we are confronted today, climate change, internationally financed terrorism, drug traffic, migration, none of the 27 countries can do that on their own. None of them. If you want to tackle that in a good way, you need to do it, the 27 together. And these are the big topics. Yes, we can disagree on the regulation of restaurants and restrooms and so on, and we can be angry on that. But the big ones, which I just enumerated, none of these you can do on your own. And migration is a big, big topic. If you want to do migration well, and I think it would be a mistake to say we need to stop migration. We need to stop illegal migration, and we need to organize legal migration in a better way. The only way to do it is if you do it with European countries together. And we need to fix it, because if you want to keep Schengen, which is the open borders can only survive if the outside borders are being controlled in the right way. But what you point at is you need to have a better way of explaining it. You need to have a better way to tell, okay, this is what the benefit of all of that is. And please, let's continue act on those big topics as 27. Sometimes that's complicated. Yep. It's not because it's complicated that we shouldn't do it.
Okay. We'll take one final question before. Just a member in the second last row. Actually, the fourth row, yes. Your glasses.
Thank you. So on the problems that you just mentioned, such as climate change, such as migration, US has made itself, very clear that it no longer cares about climate change. It is funding lots of war around the world, especially in terms of what Israel is doing in Gaza. Meanwhile, if it's not about the institution, if it's all transactional, wouldn't you say that China has now become a more willing partner to work on all of those issues than the US, and what makes them any different?
Yeah. I think what China has done extremely well, for example, on climate change, is to combine their climate change objectives with industrial policy and being very stable on it. There's a reason why today in electric vehicles, China is actually a world player. And this is because they were very, very stable in their policy, and they see the results of that today. The relationship between Europe and China is one with multiple layers. On some dimensions, we're competitors, and we're fierce competitors. Now, being competitors is not wrong. When you're competitors, you force each other to be on the top of your toes, to do the maximum in innovation, investment, and so on. I think that's good. We can stimulate each other on those dimensions. In some domains, we're partners. In fighting climate change, we're partners. I mean, it's to the benefit of everyone that we achieve that. And in some domains, we're rivals. And I think in some domains, I think it's perfectly okay to say, those economic domains, we're going to shield them off because we're not comfortable to share that type of technology. Now, that does not mean that it deteriorates our relationship. China's been doing that for a long time, shielding off certain parts of its markets, been doing that for a long time. And I think as Europeans, we should do that as well. My main role has always been reciprocity. If we have reciprocity, let's work. I have absolutely no problem if Chinese firms do takeovers of Belgian firms, as long as I can do the same on that side. I have absolutely no problem that Chinese products are being sold here as long as our IP is being protected in China. And I could imagine that from the Chinese side, there's also some concerns on reciprocity. As long as there's a level playing field and we use the same rules, let's go. And maybe on some domains we will say, hey, there we disagree. I think from the Chinese side, Europe is much more important than the United States. If you look at China, I mean, who is their export market? The number one export market of China is Southeast Asia, of course. The number 3 is United States, the number 2 is Europe. We are a much more important partner of trade for China than the United States is today. So if at some point the United States comes with sanctions on China, it will have an impact, but less of an impact than your relationship that you have with Europe.
I'm afraid that's all the time we had for the audience questions, but before we close, we ask all of our guests if they had one piece of advice for members of the Oxford Union. What would be that piece of advice from you? I gave you a heads
advice,
up.
yeah, you gave me a heads up, but I really haven't thought too much about it. I think, look, I mean, walking around here and you gave me a bit of a tour, I mean, I can only be jealous of the exposure you get at this place. I mean, this is one of the most incredible places in the world, and the exposure that you get to your co-students, people who come speak here, your academics. I mean, this is an amazing place. So when I was studying, I always used like a triple rule on the choices you make. I think, first of all, on something you're good at, try to deepen on that. So I think one thing you should do is you're good at something, let's deepen that and get even better on that. And the second thing is, on what you're good at, find something which is close to what you're good at, so do an extension. Then the third thing I would say is choose stupid shit. Do things that have nothing to do with your interests or nothing to do with what you study. And it might be that it was a bad choice, but there's this speech of Steve Jobs that talks about connecting the dots, how he explains that he did so many things in life and in the end actually it turned out to be useful. And I believe in that. And I'm going to give you an example on that. When I studied in the United States, you have many clubs of everything. And we had at the business school where I was, there was an improv club. You might know what improv is. It's basically they put you on stage and you have to try to be funny. Now, I was not a native speaker, so I said, I want to join this club. And all the Americans looked at me and said, come on. I mean, it's not your native language. You're trying to be funny in a language which is not yours. And to admit, at the start, I wasn't really funny. But I learned to land on my feet, improvise, be good at when things throw at you. That did not look useful to me at all. Do you think it's useful today that I did that? Damn right, that was a useful thing to do. So, do crazy things. And you might even have fun in doing crazy things. And politics does not qualify as crazy things, but that's something else.
Right. Prime Minister, thank you for joining, and please join me in thanking the Prime Minister. Thank you.